The wind carried dust across the wide plains, the kind that stuck to your throat and made your lungs ache. Sarah had been riding hard for 3 days, her old mare barely holding on, ribs showing under the faded brown coat. She'd come to this place because there was nowhere else left to go. A scar lined her cheek, and her eyes, tired, dark, told of nights with little sleep and years of pain she never shared aloud. When she reached the little town of Bitter Creek, she thought maybe she'd get a hot meal, maybe patch up the horse, maybe find work scrubbing floors if anyone would take pity. But she collapsed outside the saloon before she even found her footing. Jack Harlow, a cowboy known for his strength on the range and his silence in town, was the one who carried her inside. Folks whispered when he did it. Jack wasn't the kind to bring anyone home, much less a stranger. But something about the way her body trembled, the way she muttered under her breath, "It hurts," inside too, stuck in him like a thorn. He laid her on the narrow cot in his small ranch house, miles out from town. She was burning with fever, skin clammy, lips pale. He brought water, stripped off his coat, and tried to coax her awake. But when she stirred, her voice cracked like old wood. Please don't hurt me." Jack froze. He wasn't a man who scared easy, but those words shook him. Days passed before she trusted him enough to speak. She said her name was Sarah, but offered little else. He noticed how she flinched at sudden noises, how she held her stomach with both hands like she was guarding it. She stitched his shirts to pay for her keep, cooked when she could, but never once asked for more. One night, when the storm rolled heavy across the plains, lightning split the sky and thunder shook the house. Sarah jolted awake with a scream, clutching her side. Jack rushed to her, trying to calm her down, but she was shaking too hard. "It hurts, inside too," she sobbed again, curling in on herself. For the first time, Jack reached to lift her dress, not out of desire, but out of fear for what he'd find. And when he did, he froze. Her skin was lined with scars, some fresh, some old. Her ribs bore bruises in yellow and purple. Across her abdomen, jagged marks told stories of knives or belts, or worse. He felt his throat burn with rage, but his hands stayed steady, gentle as if he was touching something fragile that might break at the slightest force. Sarah turned her face away, tears rolling silently. "You see now," she whispered. "I ain't nothing worth saving. Just scraps of what men already ruined." But Jack didn't move back. He took the blanket and wrapped it around her, careful, as though the act itself might sew her brokenness together. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "no man alive had a right to lay a hand on you like that. And I'll be damned if anyone ever tries again while I still breathe." She searched his eyes, waiting for mockery, waiting for pity, but found neither. Only a raw, steady truth. In the weeks that followed, she tried to leave more than once. She thought she was too stained to stay in the warmth of another's care. But Jack always found her on the trail, never forcing her back, only standing beside her until she chose to turn toward home. Each time she returned, something inside her softened. The land healed with the season, grass rising green again, streams flowing clear, and slowly, so did Sarah. She still bore the scars, still woke with nightmares, but now there was a steady hand to hold her through them. She cooked, she laughed softly at his clumsy way with words, and she began to believe maybe she wasn't just broken pieces after all. And Jack, he carried her pain like his own, never demanding, never rushing. A man who'd spent his whole life riding alone now found the greatest strength not in his fists or his gun, but in the quiet vow he made the night he froze with her dress lifted, that he'd protect the heart beating under those scars, no matter how many storms came. Because sometimes, in the Wild West, salvation wasn't in the law, or the land, or even the church bell ringing at sundown. It was in the simple, fierce truth that even the most wounded soul could be worth more than gold to the right man. The rain had left the earth soft, mud clinging to the hooves of Jack's horse as he returned from checking the fences. The ranch house sat quiet in the distance, smoke curling from the chimney. Inside, Sarah stood by the fire, her face lit by the orange glow, holding one of Jack's shirts in her hands. She was mending a tear along the sleeve, needle flashing in and out with careful, precise strokes. When she heard the door open, her shoulders tensed, but then she saw him and let out a small breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You didn't need to fix that," Jack said, setting his hat on the peg by the door. His voice was calm, a steady drawl. "You tear through shirts faster than a coyote through a chicken coop, she replied softly, eyes dropping back to her work. Jack chuckled under his breath, moving to warm his hands by the fire. He wanted to tell her she didn't need to do anything at all, that she was free to rest, free to just be, but he knew better than to press her. She needed to feel useful, needed to carve a place in this quiet life. And so he let her, standing beside her without another word. Later, when the wind died and the night pressed close, Sarah sat awake, staring at the ceiling. Jack heard her tossing, caught the sound of her sharp breaths. He rose from his bedroll in the corner and sat at the edge of her cot. "Another dream?" he asked. She nodded, unable to meet his gaze. What was it this time? Her throat worked, but no words came. Finally, she whispered, "Him." Jack didn't need her to explain further. He'd seen enough scars to know someone had laid claim to her body in ways crueler than he could stomach. His fists clenched on his knees, but he forced the rage back down. Anger wouldn't heal her. Only time. Only patience. "Look at me, Sarah," he said gently. She turned, eyes glassy, trembling in the firelight. "You're safe here. Whatever he did, it ends here. You got my word." Her lips parted, but no sound came. Instead, she reached for his hand, tentative as a bird landing on a branch. Jack let her, their fingers brushing. For the first time since she'd stumbled into Bitter Creek, she didn't feel completely hollow inside. The days grew longer with spring. Sarah found herself wandering the fields, the grass brushing against her skirts, the sky white and endless overhead. She hadn't known peace could feel like this, quiet, uninterrupted, no footsteps following her, no harsh commands shouted at her back. Jack worked nearby, mending a fence post, his hat low over his brow. He didn't intrude, didn't demand conversation. But when she glanced his way, she saw the steadiness in him, the kind of strength that didn't break things but held them together. One afternoon, as she gathered water from the well, a wagon rolled up the dusty road. It was Mary Collins from town, her sharp eyes narrowing when she spotted Sarah. "So it's true," Mary said, lips pursed. "You're living out here now, with Jack Harlow." Sarah stiffened, clutching the bucket. "I'm just working," she murmured. "Working," Mary repeated, with a hint of scorn. "Folks are saying different. They think he brought home some saloon girl, maybe worse. You ought to be careful, miss. Reputation don't wash clean once it's stained." Sarah's stomach knotted, shame flooding her veins. She turned her face away, fighting the tears that threatened. When Mary left, the sound of the wagon fading down the road, Sarah stood frozen, the bucket heavy in her hands. Jack found her later, sitting on the steps with her head in her arms. "She was right," Sarah whispered when he asked. "They'll never see me as anything but dirty." Jack crouched in front of her, his eyes level with hers. "Let them talk. Bitter Creek's been gossiping since the day it was built. None of them know you. None of them know what you've been through. And none of them get to decide what you're worth." Her tears spilled, silent and hot. "But I ain't clean, Jack. Inside, it still hurts. I can't make it stop." His hand hovered for a moment before he laid it gently against her cheek, his calloused thumb brushing the tear away. "You don't have to make it stop. You just gotta let it heal, little by little. And I'll be right here till it does." That night, Sarah lay awake again, but this time her thoughts weren't just of fear. They were of Jack, his patience, his silence, the way he never looked at her scars like they were ugly. She turned those thoughts over and over, like a stone smoothed by a river, until sleep finally came without tears. Weeks turned into months. She began humming while she worked, soft little tunes that drifted through the house. Jack noticed, though he never said a word, just listened quietly as though it was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. She planted flowers by the porch, their colors bright against the rough wood. She mended more than shirts, she mended herself, piece by fragile piece. But healing was never a straight path. One evening, when Jack returned late from town, Sarah panicked. She'd paced the floor, convinced he wasn't coming back, that he'd left her like all the rest. When he finally walked through the door, carrying a sack of flour and coffee beans, she flew at him, fists against his chest, tears streaming. "You can't just disappear," she cried. "You can't leave me wondering if you're gone for good." Jack caught her wrists, not harshly, but firm enough to still her trembling. "I wasn't leaving, Sarah. Just went for supplies. I should have told you, you're right." She sagged against him, sobbing into his shirt. He held her, one hand cradling the back of her head, until the storm inside her passed. Later, when she'd calmed, she whispered into his chest, "I don't know how to trust this. I don't know how to believe you won't hurt me." Jack kissed the top of her hair, his lips lingering there. "Then I'll spend as long as it takes proving it. Every damn day if I have to." The summer came hot, the cattle restless in the heat. Jack worked long hours on the range, and Sarah often rode out with him, learning to guide the herd. Her laughter carried on the wind when a calf broke free and she managed to wrangle it back. She was strong, he saw that now, not just surviving, but living. One night, under a sky heavy with stars, Sarah sat beside Jack on the porch. She leaned into him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. "When you lifted my dress that night," she said quietly, "I thought I'd die from the shame of it. I thought you'd turn away like everyone else." Jack's jaw tightened. "Sarah, I didn't freeze 'cause of shame. I froze 'cause I'd never seen someone hurt so bad and still stand tall. You ain't weak. You're the bravest damn person I've ever known." Her breath caught. She turned her face up to his, eyes shimmering. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, the silence deep and steady as the land around them. Then she reached up, hesitating only a second before pressing her lips softly against his. It wasn't a kiss of hunger or claim, it was a kiss of trust, fragile and tender. Jack's hand came up to cradle her face, his touch as gentle as the night air. When they parted, Sarah's heart raced, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from fear. Life on the ranch wasn't easy, but it was theirs. Sarah found joy in small things, the smell of bread baking, the sound of the creek, the warmth of Jack's hand brushing hers when they worked side by side. The scars never disappeared, and the hurt never fully left, but she learned something she never thought possible: pain didn't have to define her. And Jack, true to his word, never let her forget that she was more than what had been done to her. He showed her in every quiet act, every steady glance, every promise kept. Because sometimes in the wild, untamed land of the West, the fiercest battles weren't fought with guns or fists, but with patience, gentleness, and the kind of love strong enough to stand against every shadow of the past. The cicadas hummed loud in the summer heat, and Sarah found herself out near the barn, hanging laundry on the line. The wind caught at the sheets, snapping them like sails, and she smiled faintly, remembering how she used to do this as a girl before the world turned dark. For a moment, she felt almost normal. But then a rider appeared at the edge of the property, dust rising behind the hooves. Sarah froze, the clothespin slipping from her fingers. A man dismounted, tall, broad, his hat low. He walked with the easy swagger of someone who thought the world owed him. "Well, I'll be damned," he drawled. "If it ain't little Sarah." Her heart seized. She knew that voice, that sneer. Tom Rollins, the man who'd once owned her, in every way a man could. Her vision blurred, her knees threatening to give. "You thought you could run," he said, spitting to the side. "But I always find what's mine." Sarah backed away, shaking. "You don't belong here, Tom. Don't belong. Girl, you belong to me from the first night I laid eyes on you." His gaze slid down her body like a knife. "Looks like Jack Harlow's been enjoying what I broke in first." Before Sarah could answer, before she could even scream, Jack stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His face was calm, but his eyes, hard as steel. "You're trespassing," Jack said. "Best you leave." Tom smirked. "She's mine. Ain't no law out here says otherwise." Jack dropped the rag, straightening to his full height. "Law or not, she ain't yours. She never was. And if you take one more step, I'll put you in the ground." The silence stretched, broken only by the flapping sheets. Tom looked from Jack to Sarah, and for the first time, she saw hesitation in his eyes. Jack wasn't bluffing, and Tom knew it. He spat again, muttered something foul, and swung up onto his horse. "This ain't over," he growled, riding off in a storm of dust. Sarah collapsed, her body shaking so violently she couldn't breathe. Jack was there in an instant, pulling her into his arms. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing, every wound of the past ripped open anew. "I can't," she choked out. "I can't keep running. He'll never stop." Jack held her tighter, his jaw set. "Then we don't run. We stand." That night, Sarah sat by the fire, staring into the flames while Jack cleaned his rifle on the table. His movements were slow, methodical, the way a man worked when he meant every motion. She watched him, guilt gnawing at her. You didn't ask for this, she whispered. Jack didn't look up. Didn't ask for cattle rustlers neither, but when they come, you deal with it. This is different, she said, voice cracking. I'm different. Broken. Damaged. Jack set the rifle down and finally met her eyes. Sarah, I don't give a damn about the scars. You think I see weakness, but I see a woman who's survived hell and still finds the strength to get up every day. That ain't broken. That's stronger than most men I've ever known. Her throat tightened, words failing her. She wanted to believe him, but the past weighed heavy, chains she couldn't shake. Still, something in his voice, firm, unyielding, lodged deep inside her, like a seed planted in barren ground. Days turned to weeks. Tom Rollins didn't show again, but his shadow lingered. Sarah flinched at every rider on the horizon, every creak of the door at night. Jack stayed close, not hovering, but steady, an anchor when she drifted too far into fear. One afternoon in town, the whispers grew louder. Sarah walked beside Jack down Main Street, her head low, feeling eyes burn into her back. Two women at the Mercantile murmured just loud enough for her to hear. She's the one who worked Rollins' place, ain't she? Folks say she was his whore. Sarah's chest constricted, her breath coming fast. She nearly dropped the sack of flour in her arms, shame flooding through her. But then Jack's hand settled lightly on her shoulder. He turned his head just enough for the women to see the hard glint in his eyes. They went silent instantly. Outside, Sarah stopped, trembling. They'll never let me forget, she whispered. No matter what I do. Jack took the flour from her hands, setting it gently in the wagon. Then let him choke on their own words. You don't answer to them. You don't answer to Rollins. You answer to yourself. She stared at him, tears brimming. And to you. Jack's expression softened. No, Sarah, you don't owe me nothing. But if you choose me, if you stay, it's 'cause you want to. Not 'cause you have to. Her lips trembled, a sob caught in her throat. That night, she kissed him again, longer, deeper, and this time it wasn't just trust, it was choice. The seasons shifted once more, the leaves turning gold, the nights colder. Sarah worked alongside Jack without fear of the sweat on her brow or the ache in her muscles. She found herself laughing more often, her voice freer. The nightmares still came, but now she woke to Jack's arms around her, his steady voice grounding her. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Sarah took a long breath. When you lifted my dress that night, I thought you'd look at me with disgust. But you didn't. And every day since, you've shown me I'm not what he made me. Jack's gaze was steady, his voice low. Sarah, he didn't make you. He hurt you, but he never owned you. You're yours. Always were. Always will be. Her tears fell silently, but this time they weren't just pain. They were release. She leaned into him, the warmth of his arm around her, the sound of the crickets rising in the night. For the first time since she was a girl, she felt something bloom inside her. Hope. Not fragile, not fleeting, but strong, rooted deep like the land itself. And though the past still haunted, those scars would always remain. Hope. Not fragile, not fleeting, but strong, rooted deep like the land itself. And though the past still haunted, those scars would always remain. She knew now that she was more than her pain, more than her fear. She was alive. She was loved. And she would never again be anyone's possession. The wind rattled the shutters that night, and Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the coyotes calling in the distance, her hand pressed over the scars on her ribs. The memory of Tom Rollins' face when he rode onto the ranch wouldn't leave her. His eyes had been the same as they always were, hungry, cruel, certain he could bend her until she broke. She hated that just the sound of his voice still made her blood run cold. Jack lay on his bedroll nearby, but she knew he wasn't asleep either. His breathing was too steady, too deliberate. She whispered into the dark, "Do you think he'll come back?" "Yes," Jack said simply. Her stomach clenched. "What will we do?" "What we always do," he answered, his voice calm as stone. "We'll stand." It should have comforted her, but instead she felt a trembling deep in her chest. Standing had always meant getting knocked down. Men like Tom didn't let go. They hunted until they had what they wanted. When dawn came, Sarah busied herself with chores. She kneaded bread, fetched water, scrubbed the floors until her hands ached. She tried to lose herself in the rhythm, but every shadow seemed sharper, every sound like hoofbeats. By noon she was so wound up she spilled the bucket of water across the porch. Jack found her kneeling there, shaking, water soaking through her skirts. He crouched beside her and gently lifted her chin. You don't have to scrub the fear out, Sarah. Let it sit. Let it burn. But don't let it rule you. Her lips trembled. You don't understand. I do, he said firmly. Maybe not the same way. But I've known fear. I've carried it. Only way to keep walking is to face it head on. She stared at him, her eyes filling. Slowly she nodded, but the knot inside her didn't loosen. A week later, the town gathered for Sunday service at the little church. Jack insisted Sarah come with him, even though she resisted. They'll just stare, she murmured. Let 'em, Jack said. Ain't none of their stares got power over you. So she went, her heart hammering as they walked through the doors. Whispers fluttered immediately. She felt them like needles against her skin. But Jack's hand rested lightly on the small of her back, steadying her, guiding her to a pew. He didn't speak, didn't make a show, but his presence beside her was a shield. The sermon was a blur. She barely heard the words. She was too aware of the eyes, the quiet judgment, the memory of Mary Collins' sharp tongue. But when the service ended, something unexpected happened. An older woman named Martha stepped forward. She had lost her husband to fever years ago, and she lived alone at the edge of town. She pressed a loaf of bread into Sarah's hands. Don't mind the chatter, Martha said softly. I know what it is to be talked about. Folks'll come around. Just keep your chin up. Sarah blinked, startled. She nodded, clutching the bread, and for the first time she felt a small crack in the wall of scorn. Maybe not everyone saw her as ruined. But peace was short-lived. That evening, as the sun dipped low, a rider came fast down the road. Jack stepped out onto the porch before the dust even settled. It was Sheriff Cale, his face grim. Rollins is back in town, the sheriff said. Been drinkin' hard at the saloon, runnin' his mouth about talkin', what's his? I can't keep him from talkin', Jack, but I can't let this boil over either. Jack's jaw clenched. You know damn well she ain't his. The sheriff sighed. I know. But words turn to fists, and fists turn to guns. Don't let it come to that if you can help it. When the sheriff rode away, Sarah stood in the doorway, pale as linen. He won't stop, she whispered. He'll come here. He'll. Jack crossed the porch in 2 strides, pulling her against him. Then he'll have to go through me. The days that followed were tense. Sarah jumped at every hoofbeat, every creak of the barn. Jack moved through the ranch like a shadow, quiet but watchful, his rifle always within reach. Sarah hated that her presence brought danger to his doorstep, but he never once looked at her with blame. Only with the same steady calm, like he'd already decided she was worth the fight. One evening, Sarah finally told him the whole truth. They sat by the fire, the night quiet around them. She twisted her hands in her lap, then spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I was 15 when my pa sold me off. Said it was better than starvin'. Rollins promised work, promised a roof. But, the first night he locked me in the room out back, I knew. He kept me there near 3 years. Said if I ran, he'd find me. And he always did. The scars, her hand touched her side, those were his lessons. He wanted me to remember I belonged to him. Jack's fists clenched, his knuckles white. But he didn't interrupt, didn't rush her. I finally got away when he was drunk, left in the night with nothing but the clothes on my back. I've been running since. And when I fell at your door, I thought I'd run my last mile. Her eyes filled, tears slipping down her cheeks. You should have left me there. You should have never picked me up. Jack leaned forward, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah, look at me. She did, though her vision blurred. You ain't his. You never were. He took what wasn't his to take. That don't make you broken, it makes him a coward and a bastard. And if he comes here, he'll find out I don't scare easy. Her tears spilled harder, but she leaned into him, letting his strength steady her. For the first time, speaking the truth felt less like tearing open a wound and more like letting it bleed so it could finally heal. 2 nights later, the storm broke. Rollins rode onto the ranch with 2 men at his back, shouting for Sarah to come out. Jack stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Sarah stood behind him, trembling but unyielding. She ain't yours, Rollins, Jack called. Rollins sneered. She's mine by right. Always was. You touch this land again, Jack said, his voice low and cold, and it'll be the last thing you do. The standoff stretched, tension crackling like lightning. Rollins shifted in his saddle, eyes darting to the rifle leveled at his chest. His men looked uneasy. Finally, Rollins spat in the dirt. "You ain't worth the bullet," he snarled. "But mark my words, girl, ain't no man can keep you forever." He wheeled his horse and rode off into the dark. Sarah sagged against the doorframe, sobbing with relief. Jack lowered his rifle but kept his eyes on the horizon until the last hoofbeat faded. Then he turned, pulling her into his arms. "You stood," he whispered against her hair. "You faced him." Her hands clutched his shirt, her body still shaking. "Only 'cause you were here." Jack drew back just enough to look into her eyes. "No, Sarah. You did it. You. Don't ever forget that." The stars burned bright overhead, the land wide and endless, and for the first time, Sarah believed him. She wasn't a possession. She wasn't a shadow. She was a woman who had survived hell and stood in the light again. And though fear still lingered, those scars still marked her, she knew now she wasn't alone. Jack's vow wasn't just words, it was life, steady as the land beneath her feet. The pain inside would never vanish completely. But it no longer owned her.